Welcome back to We the People. Today we'll be going over two important subjects in American history. First, the Continental Congress, and then the Monroe Doctrine, which is actually still involved with American foreign policy today. As always, please hit that like button and also subscribe to my channel. I am still at 34 subscribers, and on the last video I only had 59 views and no likes. Please let me know in the comments below if you like or dislike my new platform. I'm also looking at going live on YouTube within the next month or so please let me know one way or the other. All the information I have gathered comes from the History Channel files and also from the government archives. I'm going by what is in these documents and will not be putting a spin on it. So let's get going. We're going to start out with the Continental Congress. The Continental Congress served as the government of the 13 American colonies and later the United States from 1774 to 1789. The first Continental Congress, comprised of delegates from the colonies, met in 1774 in reaction to the Intolerable Acts, a series of measures imposed by the British government after the colonies resisted new taxes. In 1775, the Second Continental Congress convened after the Revolutionary War had already begun. In 1776, they took the momentous step of declaring America's independence from Britain. 5 years later, the Congress ratified the first national constitution, the Articles of Confederation, under which the country would be governed until 1789, when it was replaced by the U.S. Constitution. Here are the events leading up to the formation of the Continental Congress. Britain and the Imperial Crisis. Throughout most of colonial history, the British Crown was the only political institution that united the American colonies. The Imperial Crisis of the 1760s and the 1770s found England saddled with crippling debt, incurred in large part by the wars such as the French and Indian War. The British government responded by increasing taxes on the American colonists, which drove the colonies towards greater unity. Americans throughout the 13 colonies united in opposition to the new system of the imperial taxation initiated by the British government in 1765. The Stamp Act of that year, the first direct internal tax imposed on the colonists by the British Parliament, inspired concerted resistance within the colonies. 9 colonial assemblies sent delegates to the Stamp Act Congress, an extra-legal convention that met to coordinate the colonies' response to the new tax. Although the Stamp Act Congress was short-lived, it hinted at the enhanced unity among the colonies that would soon follow. Did you know almost every significant political figure of the American Revolution served in the Continental Congress, including Samuel Adams, John Hancock, John J. Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Patrick Henry, and George Washington. Colonial opposition effectively killed the Stamp Act and brought about its repeal in 1766. The British government did not abandon its claim to the authority to pass laws for the colonies, however, and would make repeated attempts to exert its power over them in the years to follow. So taxation without representation came. And in response to the violence of the Boston Massacre of 1770 and new taxes like the Tea Act of 1773, a group of frustrated colonists protested taxation without representation by dumping 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor on the night of December 16, 1773, an event known to history as the Boston Tea Party. Colonists continued to coordinate their resistance to new imperial measures, but between 1766 and 1774, they did so primarily through committees of correspondence, which exchanged ideas and information rather than through a united political body. Such was the formation of the First Continental Congress. On September 5th, 1774, delegates from each of the 13 colonies except Georgia, which was fighting a Native American uprising and was dependent on the British for military supplies, met at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia as the First Continental Congress to organize colonial resistance to the intolerable acts or coercive acts recently passed by the British Parliament. The delegates included a number of future luminaries, such as future presidents John Adams of Massachusetts, George Washington of Virginia, and future Supreme Court Chief Justice and diplomat John Jay of New York. The Congress was structured with emphasis on the equality of participants and to promote free debate. After much discussion, the Congress issued a Declaration of Rights, affirming its loyalty to the British Crown but disputing the British Parliament's right to tax it without representation in the Parliament. The Congress also passed the Articles of Association, which called on the colonies to stop importing goods from the British Isles beginning on December 1, 1774, if the intolerable acts were not repealed. Should Britain fail to redress the colonists' grievances in a timely manner, the Congress declared then it would reconvene on May 10th of 1775, and the colonies would cease to export goods to Britain on September 10th, 1775. After proclaiming these measures, the First Continental Congress disbanded on October 26th of 1774. The Second Continental Congress, as promised, Congress reconvened at Independence Hall in Philadelphia as the Second Continental Congress on May 10th, 1775, and by then the American Revolution had already begun. The British Army in Boston had met with armed resistance on the morning of April 19, 1775, when it marched out to the towns of Lexington and Concord to seize a cache of weapons held by colonial patriots who had ceased to recognize the authority of the royal government of Massachusetts. The colonists drove the British expedition back to Boston and laid siege to the town. The Revolutionary War had begun. Although the Congress professed its abiding loyalty to the British Crown, it also took steps to preserve its rights by dint of arms. On June 14, 1775, a month after it reconvened, it created a united colonial fighting force, the Continental Army. The next day, it named George Washington as the new Army's commander-in-chief. The following month, the Continental Congress issued its Declaration of Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms, penned by John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, a veteran of the First Continental Congress, whose letter from a farmer of Pennsylvania, 1767, had helped arouse opposition to earlier imperial messages, and by a newcomer from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson. In an effort to avoid a full-scale war, Congress coupled this declaration with the Olive Branch Petition, a personal appeal to the Britain's King George III, asking him to help the colonists resolve their differences with Britain. The king dismissed the petition out of hand. Common sense and divided loyalty. For over a year, the Continental Congress supervised a war against a country to which it proclaimed its loyalty. In fact, both the Congress and the people it represented were divided on the question of independence, even after a year of open warfare against Britain. Early in 1776, a number of factors began to strengthen the call for separation. In his stirring pamphlet, Common Sense, published in January of that year, British immigrant Thomas Paine laid out a convincing argument in favor of independence. At the same time, many Americans came to realize that their military might not be capable of defeating the British Empire on its own. Independence would allow it to form alliances with Britain's powerful rivals, and France was at that forefront of everyone's mind. Meanwhile, the war itself evoked hostility towards Britain among the citizenry, paving the way for independence. Declaration of Independence. In the spring of 1776, the Provisional Colonial Government began to send new instructions to their congressional delegates, obliquely or directly allowing them to vote for independence. The Provisional Government of Virginia went further. It instructed its delegation to submit a proposal for independence before Congress. On June 7, Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee complied with his instructions. Congress postponed a final vote on the proposal until July 1, but appointed a committee to draft a provisional Declaration of Independence for use should the proposal pass. The committee consisted of 5 men, including John Adams and Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania. But the Declaration was primarily the work of one man, Thomas Jefferson, who penned an eloquent defense of the natural rights of all people, of which he charged Parliament and the King had tried to deprive the American nation. Continental Congress made several revisions to Jefferson's draft, removing, among other things, an attack on the institution of slavery. But on July 4, 1776, the Congress voted to approve the Declaration of Independence. Waging war. The Declaration of Independence allowed Congress to seek alliances with foreign countries, and the fledgling U.S. formed its most important alliance early in 1778 with France, without the support of which America might well have lost the Revolutionary War. If the Franco-American alliance was one of Congress's greatest successes, funding and supplying the war were among its worst failures. Lacking a pre-existing infrastructure, Congress struggled throughout the war to provide the Continental Army with adequate supplies and provisions. Exacerbating the problem, Congress had no mechanism to collect taxes to pay for the war. Instead, it relied on contributions from the states, which generally directed whatever revenue they raised towards their own needs. As a result, the paper money issued by Congress quickly came to be regarded as worthless. Thus, the Articles of Confederation. Congress's inability to raise revenue would bedevil it for its entire existence, even after it created a constitution known as the Articles of Confederation. To define its powers, drafted and adopted by Congress in 1977, but not ratified until 1781, it effectively established the United States as a collection of 13 sovereign states, each of which had an equal voice in Congress, which became officially known as the Congress of the Confederation, regardless of population. Under the Articles, congressional decisions were made based on a state-by-state vote, and Congress had little ability to enforce its decisions. The Articles of Confederation would prove incapable of governing the new nation in a time of peace, but they did not seriously undermine the war effort, both because the war was effectively winding down before the Articles took effect, and because Congress ceded many executive war powers to General Washington. Treaty of Paris. Congress's final triumph came in 1783 when it negotiated the Treaty of Paris, officially ending the Revolutionary War. The congressional delegates, Franklin, Jay, and Adams, secured a favorable peace for the U.S. that included not only the recognition of independence, but also claim to almost all of the territory south of Canada and east of the Mississippi River. On November 25, 1783, the last British troops evacuated New York City. The Revolutionary War was over, and Congress had helped to see the country through. However, the Articles of Confederation proved an imperfect instrument for a nation at peace with the world. The years immediately following the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783 presented the young American nations with a series of difficulties that Congress could not adequately remedy: dire financial straits, interest rivalries, and domestic insurrections. The legacy of the Continental Congress, a movement developed for continental reform, culminating in the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. The delegates at the convention decided to scrap the Articles of Confederation completely and create a new system of government. In 1789, the new U.S. Constitution went into effect, and the Continental Congress adjourned forever and was replaced by the U.S. Congress. Although the Continental Congress did not function well in times of peace, it had steered the nation through one of its worst crises, declared its independence, and helped to win a war to secure that independence. The next subject we're going to talk about is called the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. The Monroe Doctrine was articulated in President James Monroe's 7th annual message to Congress on December 2nd, 1823. The European powers, according to Monroe, were obligated to respect the Western Hemisphere as the United States' sphere of interest. President James Monroe 1823 annual message to Congress contained the Monroe Doctrine, which warned European powers not to interfere in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. Understandably, the United States has always taken a particular interest in its closest neighbors, the nations of the Western Hemisphere. Equally understandably, expressions of this concern have not always been favorably regarded by other American nations. The Monroe Doctrine is the best known U.S. policy toward the Western Hemisphere, buried in a routine annual message delivered to the Congress by President James Monroe in December of 1823. The doctrine warns European nations that the United States would not tolerate further colonization or puppet monarchs. The doctrine was conceived to meet major concerns at the moment, but it soon became a watchword of U.S. policy in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine was invoked in 1865 when the U.S. government exerted diplomatic and military pressures in support of the Mexican president Benito Juarez. The support enabled Juarez to lead a successful revolt against the Emperor Maximilian, who had been placed on the throne by the French government. Almost 40 years later, in 1984, European creditors of a number of Latin American countries threatened armed intervention to collect debt. President Theodore Roosevelt promptly proclaimed the right of the United States to exercise an international police power to curb such chronic wrongdoings in his so-called Roosevelt Corollary, or extension, to the Monroe Doctrine. While the Monroe Doctrine's message was designed to keep European powers out of the Western Hemisphere, Roosevelt would strengthen its meaning to justify sending the United States into other countries of the Western Hemisphere. As a result, U.S. Marines were sent into Santo Domingo in 1904, Nicaragua in 1911, and Haiti in 1950, ostensibly to keep the Europeans out. Other Latin American nations viewed these interventions with misgiving, and relations between the great colossus of the North and its southern neighbors remained strained for many years. In 1962, the Monroe Doctrine was invoked symbolically when the Soviet Union began to build missile launching sites in Cuba. With the support of the Organization of American States, President John F. Kennedy threw a naval and air quarantine around the island. After several tense days, the Soviet Union agreed to withdraw the missiles and dismantle the sites. Subsequently, the United States dismantled several of its absolute air and missile bases in Turkey. And that is the Monroe Doctrine in a nutshell. Like I say, please be sure and subscribe to my channel and hit that like button. And let me know if you would like for me to continue doing these programs. The next topic I will be talking about will be the Declaration of Independence next week. So, without further ado, everybody have a good day, and God bless America.